On the night Jesus passed over from death to life, the 11 who had been 12 huddled together, waiting with their friends, caught in a grief so deep that they could ask nothing but, please, make it not be what it has been. Caught in a pain that blocked their ears to all the stories they had ever heard of the love of God, that erased from them, for that time of agony, the memory of the love of God as he created this world, that shut them off from the promises God made to never destroy this world with water again, that shut them off from all the stories, the story of God's rescue of his people. All they had left was pain, pain that had dried them up so that they themselves were nothing but bones. The prophet Ezekiel knew a lot about pain, knew a lot about grief, knew a lot about bones. He lived in a time, he served his Lord in a time when his own people were turning away, not putting their trust in the God who cared for them, but putting their trust in their own strength and their own armies. And it ended badly. And Ezekiel suffered the great grief of being taken captive away from his home, the only home he'd known. He suffered watching the other captors turn towards the gods of their captors and not listening to him. And he suffered having to tell those people that the city of Jerusalem was no more. And it was through that pain that the prophet Ezekiel came to the valley of the dry bones, where there was nothing but skeletons and the old pain in those skeletons. The stories of pain and skeletons and bones are stories that we hear from all over the world. And while Juan, a young man in the mountains in northern New Mexico, was no prophet, he was no Ezekiel, he too faced a skeleton and faced it well. Juan's friends called him Fearless Juan, for nothing ever bothered him. He'd known pain. His father had died when he was very young, and he and his mother were poor, and he was waiting. Throughout his boyhood, he was waiting to be old enough to go from the tiny village down to the town on the plains and get work and be able to send money back to his mother. But once he grew that big, once he told his mother he would be going, he would go out to earn a living, she was deeply worried. Mijito, it's dangerous out there. There are bad people. Bad things can happen. And Juan said what he always said whenever anybody worried. It will be all right. I'll take care of myself, Mother. And Carlos, my friend, and Secundino, his friend, they're coming with me. Now the boys knew that they would have to leave early in the morning, for the trip was long. But Carlos overslept. Secundino had to fix his shoe. And Juan's mother had to make one final little pot of Chilean beans for her son to take with him to remember her. So though they walked fast all day, the sun went down, it was dark, they had nowhere to stay, until they saw a little tumble-down house off away from the road. And one said, we can stay there. And Carlos and Second Nino said, really? He said, don't worry, it'll be fine. We won't get rained on. And so he led his friends to the house, and they climbed the creak steps, and they walked across the thump, thump, thump porch, and they opened the door. Carlos and Second Nino really weren't sure. Juan went right in, found a little fireplace in the corner, hung his pot of Chilean beans, a little pot, on the hook, built a fire, and as the flames flickered and the smoke raised, and the smell of Chilean beans began to fill the air, a voice spoke. Can I fall? Can I fall? And Juan, being a practical sort, said, fall if you must, but just don't fall in my Chilean beans. And clatter, spatter, crash, down came feet bones, knee bones, shoulder bones, a hip bones, some rib bones, some wrist bones, all in a heap. Juan was no prophet. Juan had no idea to ask if these bones could breathe, to answer the question, will these bones live? Juan, however, was tidy. Juan picked up the bones and laid them aside, went back to stirring his Chilean beans. Carlos and Second Nino, by the way, were so out of there they have not been heard from since. The voice came again. Can I fall? Can I fall? Fall if you must. Just don't fall in my Chilean beans. Clatter, spatter, crash, down came the rest of the ribs. The backbones, the hip bones, the shoulder bones, the arm bones, finger bones, toe bones, and right on top of it all, the skeleton, the skull with a big old grin on its face. Juan had no idea who would care for these bones. Juan knew nothing about these bones, but he picked them up tidily, and he put them aside. And he could not answer the question, will they live? Will they breathe? He didn't even think about that question. The Chilean beans were nice and warm. He was digging in his pack for the tortillas his mom had made when he heard a rattle, a clatter, and some adjustment, and some moving of bones, and he looked over his shoulder, and that pile of bones was reassembled, bone to bone, knit together with sinews. And yes, it breathed, for it said, dig. One said, dig? Dig there. And one said, wait a minute. I have walked all day. I am tired. I have a pot of Chilean beans here. I am hungry. We'll talk about digging in the morning, skeleton. And so that skeleton sat down, crossed its legs, rested its bony elbows on its bony knees, rested its bony chin on its bony hands, and it watched Juan eat the Chilean beans, and all night it watched him sleep. And when he woke up, no voice asked him whether this skeleton would ever live again. No voice asked him whether this skeleton could be brought from the grave. But the skeleton said, dig. And when Juan dug, he came up with a chest of unbelievable treasure. And as soon as he lifted that treasure out of that hole, the skeleton hopped right in. And that's when Juan realized that that skeleton had become dry bones because he had been a thief, hiding and trying to guard his treasure, and that he needed to be a skeleton in a grave. So Juan buried him, and then he looked at that treasure, and he realized he did not have to go and work. He took that treasure to his mother, and yes, they lived comfortably, but more importantly, Juan, though he was no prophet, knew the best thing to do with an unexpected treasure, and he and his mother lived a life of radical, unlimited hospitality, caring for everybody who needed their help in the mountains that are still called the Sangre de Cristos.